He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast. This is part 2 of our interview with Texas Slim. Last time, we had the most extraordinary technical problems I have ever seen. I've done probably 200 of these podcasts and have never seen anything like that. It made me think maybe Texas Slim is rattling the right cages. What is it they say? If you're taking flack, you must be over the target. I think we're over the target. So welcome back, Slim.
Hey, how's it going, Jack? Glad to be back so far. Knock on wood. Technology is looking good today.
It seems to be. Phil, last time what we talked about was how Texas Slim got to where he was. And we were setting the table for, to me, what seems to be the most intriguing, really, idea that brings together the world of food production and metabolic health. So I think we should just dive right in.
Yeah, I agree. I think last time we set the sort of framework for understanding how our food system has been manipulated and captured and the impact that is having on our health. And we were just starting to get into some discussions about what we might be able to do about that and really what each of us as individuals should be doing about that. So I'm going to let Slim kind of take it from there. And we're going to cover, how we start getting ourselves out of this problem and why this is so important to our health.
Yeah. As far as, where this has come, as far as true understanding what food intelligence is, again, understanding where the source of the seed of our nutrition is the source of the seed of our health. And a lot of people don't realize that and how it's been manipulated. So as we've moved forward with food intelligence into the beef initiative, I've been working with a lot of regenerative people in regenerative agriculture, from ranchers to, grass farmers, animal protein producers. And so by saying that, what we really want to do is do a vertical integration into our food supply, into the source of the seed, which starts with the soil, and then to the grass, and then to the cow, to the producer, to the processor, to the supplier, to market access back into human health. And overall, really becoming more of a health initiative than anything. And it being done by being able to control every one of those touch points in a way of education and access to it. And by doing that, we're leading with pure animal protein. And that's, in my mind, the best form of education for health that we have right now, because of the lies of the past, the cholesterol lies and everything that's been manipulated. We're able to really tie these together to where people can understand them and they can have access to be able to make that happen for their family, for their own selves, and, anybody else that they care to share, how they're actually living as far as sourcing their food.
Let me jump in, because you've said something, and you said it a couple of times in the previous podcast, and you said it again, and I realized there's something that's not clicking for me.
Sure.
You talked about the vertical integration of our food supply chain, and as I understand it, part of the problem that we're dealing with is a handful of companies they have vertically integrated the food chain. Mm-hmm. They own it from the seed to the wholesaler, maybe even the retailer. How is a different kind of vertical integration going to help? Is that even a good question? It seems like
it is. No, it's a good way to form some clarity around what I'm saying. Whenever I say vertical integration, I'm talking about regenerative agricultural vertical integration, not a global food supply, vertical integration of our food supply. Yeah, they've got it. They've got every bit of it, from the soil to, from the lab to the soil, to the seed, to the grass. I mean, they own every touch point, and if you follow that, in which a lot of people do in the United States of America this time, because you go to the grocery store, you're being part of that vertical integration, because they are the supplier, they are the processor, they are the market access to that food that they call, what they call food at this point in time.
Yeah.
Whenever you do a vertical integration into the regenerative agricultural model, what you're doing is you're educating where food really comes from. And then, doing the vertical integration into the soil, you're understanding what's good actually for our soil and for our grasslands. And basically, if it's good for the grasslands, it's good for the cow. What's good for the cow is good for the producer. And once you get into that understanding of, who's producing your food, well, then who's processing your food? Well, now we're going to have vertical integration to the processing centers in the state of Texas, to where we can take that from that soil to that grass to that cow, from that producer. That producer is going to have different options now to be able to use different producers. Whenever you're able to use a micro or a regional producer, you can become a supplier. Therefore, you're creating your own market access, and you're not relying on the market access of the industrial food complex that basically has captured every one of those touch points.
So
yeah, and I was just going to jump in and say one more thing, in that the system right now has been vertically integrated around the financial health of these companies. And that is really the only concern. And the physical health of the end user of the food, you and I, is really not factored into the equation. And the financial health of the producers and the ranchers is not factored into that equation. And quite frankly, the health of the animals and the health of the land that the animals are being raised on is, minimally factored in, if at all. They know they can't sell outwardly sick animals, but they really, are not focused on that, and they're not focused on the health of the land. And I think, what Slim is trying to do here is to, recenter the system and have it vertically integrated, taking into effect, our health as the end user of the product, the health of the animals being raised, the health of the land that the animals are being raised upon, and at the same time benefiting, the ranchers and the producers. And it turns out that those things can all interact very well. But what they don't do is serve the financial health of the big corporations. Right. And that's, I think, what we're trying to undo here, trying to refocus the system on.
So I think I've got a pretty clear idea of the nature of the problem, and it's much bigger, much more pervasive than I initially thought. So as somebody who's kind of got a lifelong history of being a radical individualist, my first question is, how do I get out of that silo that has been constructed by these megalithic food corporations? How do we, and by I mean each of us as individuals. Sure. I guess that's where we're going with the beef initiative, but walk us through it.
Yeah, it is, people get overwhelmed. You're trying to solve everything all at once. That's just not going to happen, for one. The best thing that I lead with, because this is the most important thing that people need to understand, is you need to find out who your local animal protein producers are. And, if you're living in a place that you can do that, if you're not in the middle of downtown Manhattan, that's going to be a little bit different. But if you're living, I'll just give an example in Texas, you need to go and find your local rancher. You need to search them out, and you need to go shake their hand. And then once you've made that commitment to understand who he is, she is, they are, then what you can do is you can begin the conversation saying, I want to know everything that you do and how you do it. Would you educate me?
Wow.
I want to know. And you know what?
They're
going to tell, that rancher is going to tell you everything that he does and how he does it, because he's proud of it. and it's heritage and it's tradition. And you're going to go down a rabbit hole of education that's going to lead you into that vertical integration that I just spoke of. You're going to learn about the soil. You're going to learn about the grass. You're going to learn about the cow. And here we go. We're off to something. And what you're going to do is you're going to start sharing that information. You're going to understand there's a different way to source my animal protein. Once you figure that out, that you can do that, and it's not that difficult. And if you don't have the means, guess what? You can come to the Beef Initiative and you can find a producer that you want to use that is trusted. If they're on the Beef Initiative, they're trusted, and you can reach out to those producers and you can say, hey, I live here, I live wherever, I want to know what you're doing. And they're going to talk to you.
I want to tell you, I after our first conversation, what was it, 10 days ago, I guess, that was on a Thursday. I went to my local farmer's market on Saturday. I told my wife, we're going to go meet some animal producers, some protein producers. And I shook the hands of, I don't know, 4 or 5 folks who sold everything from locally produced cheese and eggs to lamb and pork and cows and chickens. And I think turkey and emu too, although I wasn't interested in either of those. And it was really cool to, shake their hands, introduce myself, and find out, where they were from, and just very brief kind of stuff. Not remotely the depth that you just spoke of. But when I got home and we sat down to eat, I have a blessing that I always speak over our food. And part of that blessing goes like this. We acknowledge that this food comes to our table through the love, labor, and sacrifice of many. And as I spoke those words, it had a whole different experience. It was a whole different experience for me in that moment, having met those folks just a few hours earlier and realized the meat that I'm eating here was provided by folks just like this. It was quite the experience, and I recommend it. I recommend it to all the listeners just for the experience that I had. And I haven't done this. Question them. So I say that to simply underline what you said. Go meet you.
No, I think that's great feedback. And, you just popped about 4 or 5 flashbacks in my head of, doing that growing up. People would bring beef by our house and saying, hey, this was from so-and-so. Oh, how's he doing? He's out here in, Happy, Texas. He's doing okay. He had a good year with his cattle. And that was part of our conversations that we had growing up. And it is different whenever you trust it. You have no doubts about it. It brings something to your dinners into your, feeding of your family that is not there, that has been lost. And that takes you down that rabbit hole into a health initiative that this nation needs right now. And that's what I love about this.
Well, let's talk about this idea of food sovereignty. You use that phrase in a lot of your writing. Would you expand on that?
Well, once the way I look at it is whenever you understand where your food truly comes from, what you've done, you've set up an algorithm or a protocol that you live by that basically gives you a form of sovereignty that you've never had in your life. For the most part, for most consumers in the United States of America, we have no say-so. Throughout the years, especially since the 70s, every one of those touch points that gave us that food sovereignty has been deleted, and they've been taken over by the big processors, by the big market access purveyors of selling, food from the supermarkets. A lot of people don't realize, at the end of the gold standards in the 70s, that's when the supermarket really was created, hand in hand with us creating these big mega, fake commodities that have metabolically bankrupted our nation. So, by saying that,
that's a brilliant phrase. Metabolically bankrupted.
Well, you know who I got that from? You know who I got that from? Dr. Phil Ovadia.
Phil Ovadia.
Yeah. Early in our talks, Phil brought that up, and I said that I think I wrote about that the next week in my Substack. So I'll let you kind of take it from there, Phil.
Yeah, like we touched upon earlier in the conversation, I think during last week, during part one, we just see how when the food supply started getting manipulated, that's when our health started deteriorating. And, as everything you're saying about food sovereignty are the things that I talk about in terms of health sovereignty, and realizing how each one of us as individuals needs to take back control of our health and needs to realize that the systems that have been set up are not keeping us healthy, and they're not going to make us healthy. They're there to take care of us when we are sick for the most part. And we really need to get back to these basics. And, as you talked about the way that your grandparents, your great grandparents, had to solve these problems to get people more high quality protein, are really the same problems that we need to solve again today, and get people more high quality protein and get them back their food sovereignty, which is going to allow them to reclaim their health sovereignty as well.
Yeah, and once you start that effect, you build that momentum up to where a lot of people have a hard time, tackling a health problem, from a diet perspective or a consumption perspective. And when I say consumption, I mean, I'm talking about food, but also education. And as far as the things that you have to learn to go on diets and the restrictions that you go through, it's a lot more simple whenever you vertically integrate your understanding, your education, and your intentions and your consumption into a regenerative agriculture, because you don't have to worry. You make it a lifestyle that's not painful. It's very empowering from the very beginning. I was talking to another doctor the other day, Phil, and what she does is she helps people get out of the food ditch, a lot of the ways that you're doing. And she said, you know what, one of the best things is to get one of the people that I'm working with to just have them do a 48-hour bone broth fast, so they can actually clear their brain out a little bit, and they can see that, there is inflammation in their brain. There is something going on that they don't really fully are aware of. Once they get through that 48-hour fast, man, they have a new energy. They have a new direction. They have a new empowerment that they just never have been able to get there if they've done the diets and they've done all these, whatever diets they are. It doesn't have to be this difficult. And there is a good jump off point that gets you there pretty quick.
A bone broth fast.
Mm-hmm. 48 hours. And this is from a very established doctor. This is what she uses. And it is, a lot of people overcomplicate our nutrition these days because our food systems have been overcomplicated and it's confusing. Let's lose the complication and the confusion, and let's just go and look for pure animal protein, animal fats, and start from there. You'll find your own protocol and your own algorithm of how you're going to, obtain your dense nutrition that you've been lacking in your life. And if we do that, if we keep it simple and we keep it commonsensical, where you're developing a relationship, you're not overly analyzing your calorie intake, all this other stuff, you're going to find people that have done the same thing that you're accomplishing, and you're going to see how well they're living these days, and the stories are going to spread. And it's something that it takes off. It builds momentum.
Yeah. And, I think Jack and we've talked many times about when I was, writing my book and kind of conceptualizing my book. And I really wasn't sure how I was going to turn it into a book because, it's basically just 4 words: eat whole, real food. And you see this over and over. People come to me after they've failed, all of these diet plans. And I had the same experience myself, all of these systems and counting points and macros and calories and this and that and apps and tracking. And you really have to get people to just step back and kind of reset themselves and just, get back to the basics. And it just, you start with eat whole real food. And, again, how this relates to the food production. And, we talk about regenerative farming, and really all that is just getting back to the basics. Like, before we got all this technology involved, and before we, thought we could build a better system than nature had built, we have to remember that there were, the herd of ruminant animals that was roaming this country, 200, 300, 400 years ago was 10 times the size that it is now, and involved none of the management. They were just out there with their own system. And, if we could get back to that system, basically, we would be in a much better place. We'd be raising healthier protein, and we'd be producing it, probably at a lot more volume than we can today, with all of the technology that we've inserted into the system.
That's so true. I mean, people always say, "Oh, we can't feed the world." Yes, we can. We've always been able to achieve that whenever we localize and decentralize our food supplies, because each community, each geography of the United States is different. Everybody has different ways of stewarding those animals and stewarding the land. This is a lie that people try to, incorporate into the narrative, which is played out. The reason we monocropped was to make high profits in the chemical industries. And that's what they've done. And that's what's destroyed our soil. And it's not something that we're going to just sit there and blame, the chemical companies. What we're going to do is we're creating and innovating around what they're doing and the manipulation of what they're doing. And we're going to use the law, and we're going to use a vertical integration that has been proven and has proof of work. And we're going to keep it, locally and decentralized, community based. And once this takes off, this is going to change the narrative. This is going to change the education process and what people are looking at of what health is. People like Dr. Phil here is very, key in that, because, he's gone through the process himself as far as being able to speak to the truth and to the proof of work that is required.
I love this comment about eat. You were struggling with your book because it's really just 4 words: eat whole real food. And it reminded me of a parallel problem in an entirely different industry: education. I've got 4 kids. My wife taught all 4 of them to read. No, she doesn't have an education degree. My ex-wife, actually, she didn't have an education degree, but she taught all 4 of my children to read. And what we discovered as these kids are growing about reading is that the education system has done a magnificent job of complicating a problem, or complicating the solution to a problem, beyond all comprehension. The English language has 26 characters and 42 sounds. 5-year-olds are memorization machines. So we teach them to memorize the 26 symbols and the 42 sounds, and then they just start putting it together. And you can teach an average intelligence child how to read the English language fairly fluently in about 6 weeks. And yet they do it, they've turned it into this massive machine that takes years and accomplishes in fact, what's the number of high school graduates who literally cannot read? It's astronomical. So we see the same problem in lots of other places. I love the simplicity of this solution. Okay, I'm thinking there's a handful of categories of people who are listening and watching. There's people like me who just want to eat well. So step 1, as you say, is go meet your local protein producers. I suspect there's another kind of people. There are probably people on somewhere in the production chain who are also asking, what can I do? How can I help reverse this mess? at my position in the chain? Can you give us some ideas there? Talk to those people.
As far as people within the production chain of our food, as far as like the vertical integration, well, what we're doing in 2022 is it is an education year. It is a production year. It is an awakening. It is an awareness year. What we have to do as individuals, we have to basically make those decisions that we're going to quit participating in the consumption of the poisons, for one. That's one thing, as far as, going to the mama bears. Yeah. The mama bears out there, let's not feed our kids this anymore. That's part of the production model. Fathers, we need to get in shape ourselves. We need to have our own health initiatives. We have to, no matter who you are in this production chain and this consumption chain, you are the solution. I'm not the solution. Dr. Ovadia is not the solution. The individual is. And so anybody can contribute, and how they can contribute is starting with the own production of their food for their family in a smart and an intelligent way that is a new form of food intelligence. This is not a black and white issue across the board. This is a lot of gray areas as far as, your animal protein all the way to your produce, and how you market access your consumption model that you're stuck in right now. So each individual has to become, I know Adam Curry, and, with his No Agenda podcast, it's a very decentralized form of communication. Well, all of his listeners become producers, and they contribute to the No Agenda website and to the podcast. So we have to look at that with food too. We have to I'm going to use the Beef Initiative as a portal to where people can come and they can tell their stories. There's a section within the Beef Initiative called Mine Your Protein, where you can come, you can give a recipe, you can give a story, anything it is that you want to say, you can say it and you can be heard. And people can read your content. And if you're using somebody, if you're out there and you're one of the producers out there, to say, if you're a rancher, then you come to the Beef Initiative, put your information into the producer section. And if you have somebody that you meet that is a great rancher that you're going to use for the next year or two, you can come to the Beef Initiative and you can put your rancher in there into the section of the producer section. That's how you're helping. That's how you're integrating this new form of food intelligence into this community and this network that we're building.
Are most of these food producers, are they stuck? I'm thinking about these ranchers and farmers that I met at the farmers market. Mm-hmm. Do they largely just have very few options in terms of how to sell their product?
They don't have that market access. That market access is captured by the supermarkets and by the food purveyors that, do it in high volume, that control the restaurant supply chains, the supermarket supply chains. The independent local food producer doesn't have that market access, and that's why they're going to these farmers markets. Well, we're going to change that with a new form of logistics and a new form of understanding that maybe I can go ahead and get my animal protein delivered to me, just like Amazon's doing with Whole Foods. We're hitting it on every front. Will Harris with White Oak Pastures out in Georgia, he was the first person to start selling Whole Foods grass-fed beef from the United States of America. He had to create his own market access, and he was successful at doing that. We can do that within our local communities. There's a community called the Ogallala Commons, and they follow the Ogallala Aquifer here in the Midwest. They're building food sheds all across the Great Plains and all the way down into Texas.
What is a food shed?
A food shed is basically, if you're a local producer, you're going to have, it's like a meat market or a produce market, where you can basically consolidate your local producers, and they come there and maybe they sell twice a week. But when they do, they're feeding their local community. That stuff is happening across the United States right now. And the Beef Initiative is letting that awareness kind of leak out in a way to where the individual in the community can start participating. But it takes them not going to that supermarket and buying the same products over. It's going to take some intentionality. It's going to take a lifestyle change that is empowering. It's not a task. It's something that you can build within your family. You can take small vacations. You can just re-educate your family what food really is.
Yeah, I think it's, maybe important for us to take a little step back because, many in the audience might not be familiar with those barriers that are in place between, the rancher that raises the cattle or, grows the vegetables and, the consumers that are looking for that, healthy protein and the produce and all of the barriers that have been put in between there, and how, the rancher can't just bring sell the meat to me directly oftentimes. And the barriers that have been put in place in terms of getting that animal processed and then, being able to sell, those cuts of meat to the consumer. There's been so many levels that have been put in there, so many barriers that have been put in there that really, again, only serve to only benefit these large corporations and these conglomerations now, and the individual rancher and the individual consumer are intentionally kind of kept apart from each other. And perhaps you can go into that a little bit, Slim, for our audience that maybe just doesn't realize all the steps that are in between,
Sure.
The cow being raised on the ranch and the meat showing up, these days, usually in the supermarket.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating journey here of our protein that takes place right now. I'll hit this at two angles. Basically, if you decrease all the touch points that your food goes through and you're successful in doing that, you have two touch points. In the rancher, your rancher providing his beef because he knows who the processor is or he is the processor. So you don't have to worry about it going and traveling and being shipped and anything. You have that relationship with your rancher where you go pick up your quarter of your cow, you pick up, your steaks, your beef box, whatever it is. You have two touch points with your food. Okay, that's it. And that's doable. And a lot of people don't understand that is actually possible. And you don't have to have any permission to do that. And the laws and the regulations are out there. I'm working with Jason Rick of Rick Ranches out in Colorado right now, and he's going to host our second conference this year. He raises, he basically rebuilds the soil. He raises the grasslands where he is. He stewards his cow. He is the producer. He basically revitalized a local processing center where he is outside in Crawford, Colorado. So he's processing his own meat. Whenever he gets out of that, he packages his own meat and then he delivers it to every one of his customers. Boom, there you go. And that's all once again, it's not that complicated. But let's talk about the second type of cattle drive that we have going on in the United States. It starts in Brazil. Okay, these cattle are raised in Brazil, then they're shipped up to Mexico, where they're fed a lot of GMO grain, and from the chemical companies and the grain companies, and they're fattening up these cows in Mexico, and then they come across the Texas border, and then they're basically harvested and processed in the state of Texas. And that's the beef that we get that gets shoved out to a lot of the supermarkets. It's our average beef, basically, but it has USDA prime on it and everything since it was processed in the United States of America. Well, a lot of the beef that is being grown in the state of Texas is, prime beef. It is truly good beef, but it gets processed in the state of Texas and gets shipped overseas to places like China and Europe.
Wow.
And so Texans aren't even able to eat that beef, get that beef. And that's not across the board 100%, but that's a majority of our beef in the state of Texas. People don't realize that the beef that you see, you may be driving down the road, is not going to be the cow you eat. Your cow started in South America. And so you look at the touch points that is required for that beef to be raised and processed and then delivered to your table. You're looking at 13 to 14 touch points that you have no control over, that you do not know what that cow, where it came from, what it consumed, what chemicals was put into it, if it was, what type of cow it was. You don't know anything about its genetics. You don't know anything about the protocol or the algorithm that, was created to raise that beef. So, it's daunting to think about, and they cover it up well with very good world-class marketing and, certifications as far as how we label our food, and it keeps people in the dark. That's why I say quit overcomplicating this. Go out and find an animal protein producer and become friends with them and say, teach me, and I'm going to teach you. And you're going to help me have a health initiative within my family and within my community. And we can leave all this world-class marketing of losing weight and nutritional value and everything, leave it behind and just try this out. Try it out for a half a year and see where you end up. I guarantee you your life will change.
Wow. One of the things that has come out of my relationship with Dr. Ovadia is the big chest freezer that's on my porch.
Uh-huh.
After talking with him for a while, I realized I need to have a lot of meat, and I need to have as much as fast as possible. So I went and bought a 5 or 6 cubic foot chest freezer that I've now got sitting out there on my patio. I can see it from where I'm sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And I filled it with cheap beef. And one of the things that just blew my mind, I just realized this literally yesterday. That right there is my grandfather's wedding ring. And I've had it sitting in a box for, well, quite some time. I used to wear it on my left hand, which has a smaller joint than my right hand because I'm right-handed. And when I got married, I tried to put this ring on my right hand and it wouldn't fit. And I just assumed, my hand's bigger. Well, several months ago, I eliminated most of the junk that Dr. O is telling me to eliminate. And I grabbed this ring yesterday morning and slid it right onto my finger. My joints are smaller because I think it's because I, for all intents and purposes, eliminated grains from my diet and am eating a lot more beef. So, is that a scientific study? Absolutely not. But it was just really cool that I can wear my grandfather's wedding ring again, and I attribute it to a reduced inflammation in my body because I didn't do anything else. I did nothing else. But this joint is actually smaller than it was. This ring wouldn't go over that finger, and now it does. So,
that's
the
a
moral
good
of the
point.
story: if you want to wear old jewelry, eat more beef.
It really, it's impressive to me, with the people that I work with, that when they take that step that Slim's talking about, that they go and they find a better source for their protein. What a predictor of success that is. Because, once you do that, you're going to think about all of the food that you're eating. I don't know too many people who go out and they source and they buy whether it's a half cow, quarter cow, whatever it is, a full cow. And then, just go and continue to eat a whole bunch of junk food with that, well-sourced protein. Because the two don't go together. You don't accidentally sort of stumble upon, purchasing a half side of beef and then just not think about all of the rest of the stuff that you're going to be eating with that. So it ends up being very powerful for your health. And it's just that intentionality about what you're eating and that food sovereignty and that health sovereignty and how closely related that they are.
Well, Slim, tell us about this meeting, whatever it is, that's going on in Kerrville in April.
It's the first annual Beef Initiative Conference, and we have a heck of a lineup of speakers, all from ranchers to animal protein producers to communication people, decentralized communication people, all the way to a doctor. I've asked Dr. Ovadia to speak at one of our other conferences. We're going to bring nutrition, everything that vertical integration that I've been speaking of. We're going to be able to speak to it, and we're going to educate people of what that vertical integration is. once we, have that conference, it's going to be, something that people can take away with a call to action, that there's something tangible that they can actually reach out that next day, and they can change their lives, and they can start helping other people, and they can start spreading the word of the beef initiative, of this overall health initiative that we're going to start across this nation. And we're starting with pure animal protein. So at that conference, it's going to be, it's going to be a lot of education, which is the most important thing right now. We have to step back, like Dr. Ovadia said, and we have to really be willing to educate ourselves in a different way, point our compass a different direction, and try it out. And that's what these conferences are going to be used to do. The education part of it, from the soil to the grass, to the cow, to the producer, to the processor, and how much we basically have leverage in the state of Texas to process our own animal protein again. And this is where this is going, to where once we have that, then we have new suppliers, we have new market access that leads to, basically human health. And these conferences will be used to do that. We're hoping to, have them filmed, and where we have that video and audio content that we can use moving forward throughout the year, and then, and beyond. So we're covering all those touch points.
So who's the right person to come to this conference?
Anybody. If you're a rancher, come to the rancher, because you're going to learn about Bitcoin. You're going to learn that there's people out there that want to hear from you. The average mother that has children, that's really trying to be very intentional about saving her children's lives with a new form of health and nutrition, from somebody that is, somebody's looking at their health, somebody that's had success with their health. Anybody across the United States should be coming to this conference. This is for anybody. This is about getting back to the source of the seed in which we thrive, in which our nutrition comes from. And this is going to build. This is something that we can do now, especially with the food supply chain shortages that we're going to have. We're going to have a food supply shortage. They're going to turn beef into caviar. People need to pay attention about their food again. It's easy to go to the supermarkets now and to have plenty of food in our households. I think that's going to change. I think, look at inflation. We have a fertilizer shortage. We have a grain shortage coming. We have supply chain breakdowns. There's something that we're not going to be, people, you watch the mainstream media, all they talk about is food insecurity. Well, we're going to build food security right now, and we're going to start with the conference.
I think one of the messages that folks should take out of this is, if you really are serious about your health, then you have to take control of not just what you put in your mouth, but how you source what you put in your mouth. That became abundantly obvious to me that day I visited the farmers market and met all those folks. It was just, it created this weird mental shift for me to realize that I met 6 different people within an hour and a half or 2 hours drive of my house, who spend their life raising animals that I can eat. I can buy directly from them. And to know that I know the first name of the guy who raises the cattle that feed my family it's an amazing feeling. It really is. And I'm healthier too as a result of having started that. So, all right, well, very good. Anything else we ought to talk about before we wrap it up, Phil?
No, I think let's make sure we can get all the links so people can find Slim and all the great work that he's doing at the Beef Initiative, find out how to register for the conference.
Yeah, we've got the contact info, so go ahead and give us that again.
Sure.
And then how do folks find out about the conference, find out about the Beef Initiative?
Yeah, the best place to go right now is to go to thebeefinitiative.com, the landing pages of the conference. And then you can go into that producer section. You can go into the Mine Your Protein section, and the newsletters there as well. So there's a lot going on just at beefinitiative.com. And then if you want to follow me, all I do is use Twitter. I don't use any other social media, thank God. But it's at Modern Tea Man on Twitter. If you use those two links, you can find out as much as you need right now. And you can reach out to me. You can DM me. You can email me through the Beef Initiative. So there's plenty of contact information there.
Very good. Well, I appreciate
simple.
you coming back in and letting us finish this conversation.
Yeah. Hey, technology performed today. So
from everything I can see, we didn't have any problems. We'll see awesome. once it renders, but
right. No, I appreciate you guys. Thank you, Jack. And thanks, Dr. Phil.
We appreciate you being here with us.
Yep, thank you. And it's a great conversation, and one that I suspect we're going to circle back to at some point in the future again.
Yes.
And we have a few other guests lined up along, similar topics as well.
Well, and with that in mind, I've looked at our upcoming guest list. You folks who are listening and watching, you're definitely going to want to see some of these upcoming interviews we've got. I'm really excited about it. You can follow Dr. Philip Ovadia on Twitter at iFixHearts. His website is ovadiahearthealth.com. For Dr. Ovadia, for Texas Slim, I'm Jack Heald. This is the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast. We will talk to you next time. America is fat and sick and tired. 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy and at risk of a sudden heart attack. Are you one of them? Go to ifixhearts.co and take Dr. Ovadia's Metabolic Health Quiz. Learn specific steps you can take to reclaim your health, reduce your risk of heart attack, and stay off Dr. Ovadia's operating table.